The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red tunic and checked his rifle one final time. After 15 years of service as a Queen's Guard, he had seen everything from curious tourists trying to make him laugh to protesters shouting demands at the palace gates. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. Thomas stood perfectly still at his post, his black bearskin hat sitting firmly on his head despite the growing heat of the July afternoon. Hundreds of tourists gathered around the palace railings, cameras clicking and children pointing at the motionless figure in red. He had mastered the art of becoming a living statue, breathing so quietly that visitors often debated whether he was real or made of wax. The crowd today seemed particularly thick, with summer vacation bringing families from around the world to witness the changing of the guard ceremony. Thomas could hear dozens of different languages being spoken as people pushed closer to the iron railings, hoping to catch a perfect photograph of the famous British tradition. Among the sea of faces, one young man stood out immediately. Marcus Pemberton, 22 years old, wore designer clothes that probably cost more than Thomas earned in a month. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the kind of arrogance that only comes from never being told no. Marcus had arrived in London just 2 days earlier, his father having bought him a luxury apartment in Mayfair as a graduation gift from Oxford. Marcus pushed through the crowd with little regard for the families and elderly tourists around him. He had promised his social media followers that he would create content that would go viral, and he was determined to deliver something spectacular. The Queen's Guard seemed like the perfect target for his latest stunt. Excuse me, Marcus said loudly as he elbowed past a family with young children. The father glared at him, but Marcus was already moving forward, his phone held high as he began recording a video. "What's up, everyone? It's Marcus here, and I'm standing outside Buckingham Palace about to do something absolutely mental," he announced to his phone camera. Several tourists turned to look at him with curiosity, while others seemed annoyed by the disruption to their peaceful sightseeing. Thomas noticed the commotion but maintained his position. He had dealt with attention-seeking visitors countless times before. The key was to remain completely still and professional, no matter what ridiculous behavior unfolded in front of him. His training had taught him that engaging with disruptive individuals only encouraged them further. Marcus approached the railing with growing confidence, his follower count climbing as more people joined his live stream. The comments were already flooding in, with viewers encouraging him to do something outrageous. He fed off their energy, feeling invincible as he prepared to make his mark on the historic location. "You see this guard here? Watch me make him break character," Marcus declared to his camera, zooming in on Thomas's stoic face. "These guys aren't allowed to move or speak, no matter what you do to them. It's like having a real-life toy soldier." The first attempt was relatively mild. Marcus began making faces at Thomas, pulling exaggerated expressions and waving his arms dramatically. When that failed to get any reaction, he started shouting jokes and making loud noises. Other tourists began to gather around, some laughing at the spectacle, while others appeared uncomfortable with the disruption. Thomas remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He had endured far worse provocations during his career. Drunk football fans, political protesters, and attention-seeking teenagers had all tried and failed to break his concentration. This spoiled young man would be no different. Growing frustrated by the lack of response, Marcus decided to escalate his behavior. He began telling the crowd stories about his family's wealth and connections, claiming that his father knew important people in the government who could have any guard fired with a single phone call. "My dad owns half of Chelsea," Marcus boasted loudly. Though this was a complete exaggeration, he could buy this entire palace if he wanted to. "These guards work for people like my family." Some tourists began to look uncomfortable, recognizing the entitled attitude for what it was. Parents started pulling their children away from the area, not wanting them to witness the increasingly aggressive behavior. However, Marcus's online audience was eating it up, sending donations and encouraging him to push further. The situation escalated when Marcus noticed a small section of the railing that was slightly lower than the rest. Without thinking about the consequences, he grabbed the iron bars and began to climb, his expensive designer shoes struggling for grip on the smooth metal surface. Security cameras immediately picked up the movement, and alarms began sounding in the palace's monitoring room. Thomas's earpiece crackled to life with urgent instructions from his commanding officer. but he was already assessing the situation and preparing to respond according to his training. "Sir, step back from the railing immediately," Thomas commanded, his voice cutting through the crowd noise with military precision. It was the first time he had spoken in over an hour, and the sudden break in his silence shocked everyone present. Marcus paused halfway up the railing, surprised by the guard's response. This wasn't what he had expected. In all the videos he had watched online, the guards never spoke or moved, no matter what tourists did to provoke them. "Oh, so you can talk after all," Marcus laughed, still clinging to the railing. "I thought you were just a fancy decoration. Come on, everyone's watching. Don't you want to be famous?" The crowd had grown substantially, with people stopping their tours and sightseeing to witness the unfolding drama. Social media notifications were buzzing as word spread about the confrontation at Buckingham Palace. Marcus's live-stream viewer count had reached several thousand, with comments pouring in faster than anyone could read them. Thomas took a step forward, his polished boots clicking against the stone pavement. The movement was sharp and deliberate, causing several tourists to instinctively step backward. Years of military training were evident in every aspect of his posture and movement. "Sir, I am ordering you to step down from that railing and move back to the designated tourist area," Thomas repeated, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable tone of authority. "You are in violation of multiple security protocols." Marcus's confidence began to waver slightly, but the encouragement from his online audience kept him going. Donations were flooding in, and several viewers had shared the stream to their own social media accounts. The attention was intoxicating, and he couldn't bring himself to back down now. "What are you going to do about it?" Marcus challenged, pulling out his phone to make sure he was still recording. "You can't touch me. I know my rights. My father's lawyers would have you arrested for assault." The tension in the air was becoming palpable. Other guards had begun moving into position around the perimeter, though they remained far enough away to avoid escalating the situation unnecessarily. Palace security officers were also approaching, their radios crackling with updates and instructions. Thomas remained perfectly calm, his years of training and experience taking over completely. He had dealt with genuine security threats before, and while this young man was clearly more annoying than dangerous, proper protocol still needed to be followed. "This is your final warning," Thomas stated clearly. "Step down immediately, or you will be forcibly removed and detained." The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Cameras and phones were pointed in every direction, capturing every moment of the escalating confrontation. Social media was already buzzing with clips and commentary about the incident. Marcus looked down at the stern face of Thomas Mitchell and felt his first flutter of genuine concern. The guard's expression had changed from neutral professionalism to something much more serious. The playful atmosphere that Marcus had been trying to create suddenly felt heavy and dangerous. "You're just trying to scare me," Marcus said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments earlier. "You guys are all for show. You can't actually do anything." Thomas took another step forward, and this time Marcus could see the decades of military experience in the guard's eyes. This wasn't a ceremonial figurehead or a tourist attraction. This was a trained soldier who had served his country in some of the world's most dangerous places. "Sir, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq before joining the Queen's Guard," Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Marcus to hear. "I have been trained to neutralize threats to the crown and the royal family. You are currently presenting such a threat." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His online audience was cheering him on through the comments, but they were safely behind their computer screens. Marcus was face to face with someone who had seen real combat and was clearly prepared to use that experience if necessary. Palace security officers had now positioned themselves at strategic points around the area, their presence becoming more obvious to the growing crowd. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, head of Palace Security, was coordinating the response from her position near the main entrance. She had been monitoring the situation through security cameras and was prepared to escalate if necessary. "We have a code yellow situation at the north gate," she spoke into her radio. "Subject is a young male, approximately 22 years old, currently attempting to breach the perimeter. Guard Mitchell is handling the situation according to protocol." Marcus's phone was still recording, but his hands had begun to shake slightly. The adrenaline that had fueled his confidence was now working against him, as the reality of his situation became clear. He was clinging to a railing outside one of the most secure buildings in the world, being confronted by highly trained security personnel. "Look, I was just having a bit of fun," Marcus said, his voice now noticeably less steady. "It's just content for social media. Everyone does this stuff now." Thomas remained unmoved by the explanation. "Sir, intent is irrelevant when it comes to security protocols. You have attempted to breach a restricted perimeter, ignored direct orders from security personnel, and are currently in violation of the Official Secrets Act of 1989. The mention of specific legislation sent a chill through Marcus. These weren't empty threats or ceremonial procedures. The guard was citing actual laws that carried real consequences. Marcus's father was wealthy and well-connected, but even his influence had limits when it came to national security matters. Meanwhile, the crowd of tourists had grown substantially. Word of the confrontation had spread throughout the area, and people were abandoning their planned tours to witness the drama unfolding at Buckingham Palace. Local news crews, always monitoring police scanners for breaking stories, had begun arriving on the scene. Rebecca Chen, a reporter for BBC London, pushed through the crowd with her camera operator. She had covered numerous incidents at the palace over the years, but this situation seemed different. The tension was palpable, and she could sense that something significant was about to happen. "This is Rebecca Chen reporting live from Buckingham Palace, where a confrontation is currently underway between palace security and what appears to be a young tourist." She began speaking into her microphone. "The situation appears to be escalating, with multiple security personnel now involved." Marcus could hear the reporter and realized that his stunt was attracting far more attention than he had intended. What had started as a social media prank was becoming a genuine news story. His phone notifications were going crazy as his live stream was shared across multiple platforms, but the excitement he had felt earlier was now replaced by growing panic. "I want to come down now," Marcus said, looking around for a way to climb back down the railing without losing face completely. Thomas nodded once, a brief acknowledgement that the situation might be resolved peacefully. However, protocol still required that proper procedures be followed. Marcus couldn't simply climb down and walk away as if nothing had happened. "Sir, I need you to remain exactly where you are," Thomas instructed. "Do not attempt to climb down on your own. Security personnel will assist you in safely returning to the ground, and then you will be escorted to a secure location for questioning." The word questioning sent another wave of anxiety through Marcus. He had imagined his stunt ending with applause and viral fame, not with being detained by palace security. His social media followers were still encouraging him to continue, but they weren't the ones facing the consequences of his actions. Detective Inspector Collins had moved closer to the scene, positioning herself where she could intervene if necessary. She had dealt with hundreds of security incidents over her career, and her experience told her that this situation was reaching a critical point. The young man on the railing was clearly losing his nerve, which could make him either more cooperative or more unpredictable. "Mitchell, status report." She spoke into her radio, using the discreet frequency that wouldn't be overheard by tourists or media. "Subject is showing signs of cooperation but remains non-compliant with direct orders," Thomas responded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Requesting permission to proceed with assisted removal." "Permission granted. Use minimum necessary force. We have media present." Thomas understood the implications immediately. Whatever happened next would be recorded from multiple angles and broadcast around the world within hours. The reputation of the palace guard and the security services would be judged by how professionally they handled this situation. Marcus was becoming increasingly aware that he had made a serious mistake. His expensive clothes were now wrinkled and dirty from clinging to the iron railing, and his perfectly styled hair was disheveled from sweat and anxiety. The confident young man who had started this confrontation was nowhere to be found. "Please, I just want to go home," Marcus said, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." Thomas's expression softened slightly, recognizing the genuine fear in the young man's voice. Despite his years of training and experience, he was still fundamentally a decent person who took no pleasure in seeing someone suffer the consequences of poor judgment. "Sir, cooperation will be noted in my report," Thomas said carefully. "However, the situation has progressed beyond the point where it can be resolved with a simple apology. You will need to speak with security officials and likely face formal charges." The crowd began to murmur as two additional guards approached the railing from either side. They moved with the same precise, professional manner as Thomas. Their actions coordinated and efficient. It was clear that this was a well-rehearsed procedure, not an improvised response. Marcus looked down at the three guards now surrounding his position and realized that his situation had become completely hopeless. His phone was still recording, but he no longer cared about his social media presence or his follower count. All he wanted was to escape the humiliation and consequences of his foolish decision. "I'm going to cooperate completely," Marcus announced loudly, hoping that his public declaration would somehow improve his situation. "I made a mistake, and I'm ready to face the consequences." Thomas nodded once more, acknowledging the statement while maintaining his professional demeanor. The next few minutes would determine whether this incident ended peacefully or required more aggressive intervention. Years of training had prepared him for this moment, but he still hoped that common sense would prevail. The next few minutes unfolded with military precision that left the crowd speechless. Thomas and his fellow guards moved in perfect coordination, their actions speaking to years of training and countless hours of practice. What happened next would be talked about for years to come and shared millions of times across social media platforms worldwide. "Sir, I need you to extend your right hand toward me," Thomas instructed, his voice calm but commanding. "Do not make any sudden movements, and follow my instructions exactly." Marcus, now completely stripped of his earlier arrogance, did exactly as he was told. His hand trembled as he reached toward Thomas, who grasped it firmly but gently. The guard's grip was steady and reassuring, a stark contrast to the chaos Marcus felt inside his own mind. "On my count, step down slowly," Thomas continued. "Keep your eyes on me, not on the crowd. 1, 2, 3. Marcus carefully climbed down from the railing, guided by Thomas's steady hand. The moment his feet touched the ground, the other two guards moved into position on either side of him. It was a textbook example of professional security work, executed flawlessly despite the pressure of hundreds of watching eyes and rolling cameras. The crowd erupted in applause, though whether they were cheering for the guards' professionalism or Marcus's safe return to the ground was unclear. What was clear was that everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary, a perfect demonstration of how trained professionals handle difficult situations. Detective Inspector Collins approached the group, her badge clearly visible as she took control of the situation. "Marcus Pemberton," she said, having quickly identified him through facial recognition technology and social media analysis. "You are under arrest for attempting to breach royal security, ignoring lawful orders from authorized personnel, and creating a public disturbance." Marcus's face went pale as the formal charges were read. This was no longer a prank or a social media stunt. This was a criminal matter that would follow him for the rest of his life. His phone had finally stopped recording when one of the guards gently removed it from his shaking hands. "I want to call my father," Marcus said weakly, the last vestige of his entitled attitude clinging to the familiar safety net of family wealth and influence. "You will be given the opportunity to contact a solicitor once we reach the station," Detective Inspector Collins replied professionally. "However, I should inform you that this incident has been recorded by multiple security cameras and broadcast live on social media. The evidence against you is substantial and clear." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Thomas returned to his post with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout the entire confrontation. He adjusted his uniform, checked his rifle, and resumed the perfectly still position that had made him famous around the world. To the casual observer, it was as if nothing had happened at all, but something remarkable had happened, and the world was beginning to take notice. The video of the confrontation, recorded from dozens of angles by tourists and news crews, was already spreading across the internet at an incredible rate. Within hours, hashtags like Royal Guard Justice and Buckingham Showdown were trending globally. The footage showed not just Marcus's entitled behavior and eventual arrest, but Thomas's incredible professionalism throughout the entire incident. Viewers were amazed by his calm demeanor, his precise actions, and his ability to de-escalate a potentially dangerous situation without resorting to unnecessary force. Military veterans around the world began sharing the video with pride, pointing out the years of training and discipline required to handle such situations with such skill. Parents showed the footage to their children as an example of how real strength and authority don't require shouting or aggression. Rebecca Chen's news report became one of the most watched segments in BBC London's history. Her footage captured not just the dramatic confrontation, but also the aftermath. the respectful silence of the crowd as they realized they had witnessed something special. "What we saw here today," Rebecca reported in her follow-up segment, "was a masterclass in professional security work. Guard Thomas Mitchell demonstrated that true authority comes not from intimidation or force, but from competence, training, and unwavering dedication to duty." Meanwhile, Marcus found himself in a detention cell at Belgravia police station, facing charges that could result in substantial fines and even prison time. His father's expensive lawyers were already working on his case, but even they admitted that the evidence was overwhelming and the charges were serious. The irony was not lost on anyone that Marcus's quest for viral fame had indeed made him famous worldwide, just not in the way he had intended. His name became synonymous with entitled behavior and poor judgment, a cautionary tale shared by parents and teachers around the globe. Thomas, on the other hand, became an unexpected internet sensation for all the right reasons. Videos of his calm, professional response were shared by military organizations, law enforcement agencies, and ordinary people who were inspired by his example. He received thousands of messages of support from around the world. The palace issued a brief statement commending Guard Mitchell and his colleagues for their professional handling of the situation. While they didn't elaborate on specific details, sources close to the royal household indicated that senior officials were impressed by the way the incident had been resolved. 3 days after the confrontation, Marcus appeared in Westminster Magistrates' Court. The courtroom was packed with journalists and curious observers who wanted to see the conclusion of the story that had captivated millions of people worldwide. The magistrate was not sympathetic to Marcus's claims that it had all been a harmless prank. "Mr. Pemberton," she said sternly, "your actions demonstrated a complete disregard for national security protocols and the safety of both yourself and others. The fact that you broadcast your illegal behavior live on social media shows a level of premeditation that makes your offense particularly serious." Marcus was sentenced to 6 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, 200 hours of community service, and a substantial fine. He was also banned from coming within 500 meters of any royal residence for 5 years. His social media accounts, which had briefly gained millions of followers during the incident, were permanently suspended by the platforms for violating their terms of service. The community service was specifically assigned to work with military veterans and their families, a decision that the magistrate hoped would help Marcus understand the dedication and sacrifice represented by people like Thomas Mitchell. Thomas continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, though he was surprised by the level of recognition his professionalism had received. He gave no interviews and made no public statements about the incident, maintaining the discretion and humility that had made him such an effective guard in the first place. Months later, Marcus completed his community service with a very different perspective on life. Working with veterans had taught him about real courage, sacrifice, and service to others. He wrote a public letter of apology to Thomas Mitchell and the entire Queen's Guard, acknowledging his behavior and expressing genuine remorse for his actions. The incident became a case study in security training programs around the world, demonstrating how professional, well-trained personnel can handle difficult situations with minimal force and maximum effectiveness. Thomas's response was held up as an example of everything that modern security work should aspire to be. The story became legendary not because of Marcus's foolish behavior, but because of Thomas's exemplary response to it. In a world often divided by conflict and controversy, people found inspiration in the quiet competence of a man who simply did his job with dignity and skill. Years later, when tourists visit Buckingham Palace, guides often tell the story of the entitled youth who thought he could challenge a Queen's Guard, and how that encounter taught the world what real strength and authority actually look like. The guards at their posts, standing perfectly still in their red tunics and bearskin hats, represent something far more important than ceremony or tradition. They represent the highest ideals of service, duty, and professional excellence. Thomas Mitchell never sought fame or recognition for doing his job that day, but his example inspired millions of people around the world to approach their own responsibilities with the same level of dedication and professionalism. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of all from that shocking afternoon at Buckingham Palace.